All things Sailor Loot, what it is, how do you get it, do you want it, and of course my top tips and tricks on how to best make use of it. All that in today's video, you don't want to miss it. Welcome to our next adventure with me, Jason. In today's video, as I said, we're going to be discussing what is Sailor Loot, do you want it, and of course my tips and tricks for how best to use it and actually how best to not use it. There are some things you have to be a bit careful of. So if you're interested, that's what we're going for. Let's get started. But first things first, the basics. What is Sailor Loot? Sailor Loot is essentially just onboard credit in Virgin Voyages terminology. They like to say it's their cheeky way of referring to onboard credit, but it's just adding more confusion to people who are not familiar with it. So it's essentially like having real money, but only available once you're on board the ship. That's simple, no complaint. The next question is, of course, how do you get hold of this free money or onboard credit? Well, of course, nothing is free in life, and this is no exception to that, but there are sort of the good ways of getting Sailor Loot and the not so good ways. Now, I just want to be clear, the not so good ways doesn't mean that you had to do something terrible to get hold of it. It's rather that if you're getting Sailor Loot through that method, you had to experience something pretty unpleasant, and so we don't want to have gone through that. Whereas the good ways, again, you're not a great person for having done that necessarily, but it's sort of the easy, direct way where you sought to get it. So let's go through the good ways and the not so good ways. So let's start off with the good ways, or the direct ways in which you can get Sailor Loot that you can actually actively seek out. First things first, you could get it as part of an ongoing promotion. Maybe Virgin are saying, hey, if you book now, we'll throw in $100 of Sailor Loot. Okay, that's one way. The other way is going to be potentially through a travel agent. What often happens is travel agents, or rather these travel agent agencies and groups, have got certain perks or can offer you sometimes some bit of Sailor Loot depending on the length of stay of your sailing and or how many people they can maybe book and connect you to using something called Circle. Ask them about it, you'll probably see it. It's just essentially that they connect the bookings of several people, and because of that, Virgin kind of viewed as if there was a group booking and they can give you a little bit extra or some nice stuff. And the other way is essentially coming from some of the commission that they could potentially earn by you booking through them. This is one of the ways they incentivize people to use travel agent. The other method is going to be already once you're on board the ship using the My Next Virgin Voyage voucher. So I've discussed that previously, but in a video, but I will mention it briefly here. And that is, once you're on board, you can go and purchase this sort of voucher, which is you putting down a deposit for a future sailing. All right, let's talk about those bad ways of getting Sailor Loot. So the first thing is going to be, let's say you booked an excursion prior to the sailing for $100. You paid real money for that excursion on the app. And now, a few days before the sailing, or maybe that excursion, you decide, oh, you know what, I actually just don't feel like it, or I found something better, or I just don't want to go. So you cancel it. If it's within a certain window period, they will not be able to give it back to you onto your original form of payment, or method of payment rather. Instead, they're going to at best give it to you as Sailor Loot for your account once you're on board the ship. So be aware of that. The other thing is going to essentially be an apology of some sort, or a gesture of goodwill. So for example, you went on an excursion through Virgin Voyages and something terrible happened. Now you go and complain to Sailor Services and they say, wow, we looked into it, or we're really sorry to hear about that. In the meantime, we're going to be giving you, I don't know, some percent of that back as Sailor Loot or onboard credit whilst we look into it, okay? So how does Sailor Loot work once you actually have it? So let's say you're now on the ship, your vacation's beginning, it's going to be so much fun, and you now have like $100 of Sailor Loot. Well, anything that costs extra on the ship, it is first going to come out of your Sailor Loot unless it is going to be a drink. If you've got a bar tab, your drinks and all the associated fees for your drinks will come off of the bar tab as a priority. And if there's no more bar tab, or not enough to pay for the drinks because you're now about to zero out your bar tab, then the remaining amount will come off of your Sailor Loot. After that, anything you purchase is going to go towards your Sailor Loot balance. Then, if you have no bar tab, or you're not purchasing alcohol, etc., or anything drinks related rather, then yes, it's going to come off of your Sailor Loot instead of first hitting your bank account when things are over. And you'll be able to check in the app what your balance is at all times. It usually updates pretty quickly. And if you do see any issues or incorrect charges, make sure you let Sailor Services know sooner rather than later. So let's talk about my tips and tricks to do with Sailor Loot. So I'm going to break this up into first the tips and tricks of things you should be careful of, or to avoid rather, And then I'm going to talk about the positive things, or how I best think you should make use of your Sailor Loot. So things you either need to be avoid or aware of or careful of when it comes to using Sailor Loot is, number one, you can only use it once the sailing begins and you're on board the ship. Why do I mention this? A lot of people make the mistake of unfortunately thinking that if you have Sailor Loot and the sailing hasn't begun yet, and you see an excursion you like, for example, you can just go and book it and it will come off your Sailor Loot. No. Anything you purchase prior to sailing is going to come off of your method of payment, like your credit card, etc. Once you're on board the ship and your sailing's begun, then if you purchase an excursion or treatment at the spa or the spa pass, etc., 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 then it will start using your Sailor Loot. Other thing is just a general thing. It applies to even if you're not using Sailor Loot. If you're using a bar tab, Sailor Loot, your actual money, etc., but it applies to it, so I'm telling you it. And that is, when you're in port, be very careful, because at that stage, you are probably going to be charged taxes for anything that you are able to purchase whilst on the ship. So an example I'll give that also covers bar tabs, etc., is, let's say you worked out that you can get 10 drinks throughout your sailing and each drink costs $10 and you've got $100. So you go 100 divided by 10, great, 10 drinks, maths checks out. Now what happens is, at some point you're in port and you're on the ship and you say, oh, you know what, I feel like getting that drink right now. So you go and you get the drink. What will happen is actually you are going to get now charged any taxes that are relating to being in port. So somewhere along the line, if you weren't noticing this, you'll see that you're about to go purchase your final drink. You look at your balance and you're wondering, whoa, what happened? I've been only getting this drink. It's the only thing I've been buying, and that should have been the only thing coming off. The answer is you are getting charged taxes. So be very careful about this whenever you're spending, whether it's your bar tab or Sailor Loot or your actual money, to the extent that it could have been avoided. And the last thing is something I may have already mentioned, and that is going to be that when the sailing is over, any balance you have left is not going to be refunded to your bank account through your original form of payment, etc. It's going to get zeroed off. So if, let's say, it is the night before your final day and the shops have all closed, and for some reason anything that would have cost extra money has been removed from being able to be purchased on the ship, well, that's it. If you had $100 left, then when you leave the ship tomorrow and you get your account, you're going to see how you had that $100 left and they just removed it. Gone. It's floated off into the ether, never to be seen again. Okay, let's talk about my tips and tricks for when it comes to using your Sailor Loot in the best way possible. Now, I'm going to first start with the ultimate way, because cash is king, and so any way that can get you cash is probably your first preference. But again, there is a disclaimer here. It is going to involve the casino, and of course that means you could lose your money, and I am not condoning that you go and gamble. I'm not recommending it. I'm just giving you information and educational information on how potentially you could use the casino to take your Sailor Loot and turn it into real money. So please be aware of that. Okay, let's say you were interested in how that would potentially work. So you can go into the casino with your Sailor Loot and tell them, look, I'd like you to take of my Sailor Loot, because you don't have to use all of it in this method. You can use some of it or you can use all of it, whatever. And I'd like that in promotional chips. Now, two things there. I said chips, not credit. So we're not talking about using any slot machines. You would have to go in particular to the blackjack table. That is statistically going to be the better game, or the one where the odds are not totally tilted against you if you know what you're doing. Now, once you do that, they're going to give you however much the value was you asked for in promotional chips. Promotional chips, you cannot now just take those and give them back and say, I want that in cash. Can't do it. They are worth zero real money. They are only going to be able to be worth something if you go and gamble with them and win. So how does it work? Let's say I go to the table and I put down $10 to be dealt in. And let's say I lose. Okay, they take my chip and I put another 10 of the promo chips. However, let's say I won. Now, whatever the payout is on the table, 3-2, whatever it is, they will pay you out in real cashable chips, and you'll just leave your original bet on the table there, which is the promo chip. So you keep on just playing through until after a combination of winning and losing, you will have only be left with real cashable chips. You can then go to the cashier and say, yeah, these are the chips. I want to cash it all out, and they'll give you the money. It's that simple. Now, of course, there's two sides I want to point out to this. If you only win, you'll win real money, or real cashable chips rather, and you'll still have this stack of sort of useless or worthless promotional chips. But that's not typically what happens to people, so you just have to cycle through or wash the promotional chips, as you would say. Now, there is a quicker Slightly more painful or potentially more painful method, but it is the one where you could just guarantee how much you walk out with. It is a little bit more difficult to do because you have to find someone who's, I guess, not inebriated and actually understands what you're trying to say to them, which at that casino can sometimes be one of the hardest things you've ever tried to look for in your life. Anyway, what you'll do is you'll go and, let's say, find someone and say, hey, look, and this would probably have to be someone who's at, let's say, a blackjack table somewhere. And you say to them, look, I have Sailor Loot, which I can get promotional credits or promotional chips with. I have 1,000, let's say, in this example. I'd be willing to sell you those 1,000 for a discounted value. So you can then negotiate. Let's say you say, I'll sell them to you for $500 of real chips or real money. And you just do the transaction with them. They give you the $500 of chips or actual cash, and you give them your $1,000 of actual promotional chips. Now you may be wondering, wait, why would I do that? I'm losing 500. Well, you're losing potentially 500 in winnings that you might win if you gamble and it becomes something, but you're locking in an actual cash amount. So if you really don't know what you're doing, or even if you do know what you're doing and it's just not your night and it's just a bad luck or whatever the case may be, well, you're going to walk out 500 for sure. That's that method. It's the only way you're going to be able to get cash. We're moving on to the rest, which is going to be better ways of using it or prioritizing or thinking about using Sailor Loot. Before we move on, if you haven't already, I would greatly appreciate you subscribing to the channel. You can click the subscribe button below. If you're enjoying this video, give it a thumbs up. And of course, please leave some feedback or comment that you'd like to share in the comment section below. If you're watching this on your TV, then over here is going to be a QR code that you can use to scan to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already a subscriber. And to everyone out there, there is an Instagram page that is super useful to help inspire and give you some ideas for when you're traveling. So if you haven't already started following the Instagram page, this QR code over here is going to take you to that. Anyway, back to the video, and thanks so much. Okay, so now let's get on to the rest of my tips. So the first thing is to understand my general way of thinking and mindset when it comes to using Sailor Loot, because that's going to help you understand my decision making in the rest of these tips and tricks I'm about to give you. So the number one rule is, when I'm going on a vacation, I don't want to spend more money than I need to, right? In other words, I want to minimize my cash outflow if it is something I can minimize or avoid. That is everyone's situation. If you can have the same experience and spend less, you'd want to do that. If you can have the same experience without spending anything extra, you'd want to do that. So that's how I think about it. With that in mind, what does that mean? It means that any time I would normally actually spend real money, I try and consider, is this something I can instead use my Sailor Loot for? That might sound super obvious, but here's an example to illustrate it better. Let's say I'm going to be going on a sailing and one of the ports has got an excursion I would like to do. Now, it might not be do or die, and usually if it's do or die, this doesn't apply. What I mean by do or die, it means that if I don't do this excursion, this port's a waste for me, I hate it, it's a useless port, blah, 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 blah. Okay? It's something where I say, well, I'd like to do it if I can, but it won't be the end of the world if I cannot. Okay. Now I say to myself, right, is this going to be the cheapest way for me to get it? So if I want to get this excursion guaranteed, I obviously need to pay for it with cash prior to the sailing. But if once I'm on board the ship, I have access to my Sailor Loot now and there's still available slots for that excursion, I can use the Sailor Loot to pay for that excursion. The next thing actually has to do with sort of if there is anything that they're selling at the shops that I do want or need, right? So obviously if you need something, it's a no-brainer. If you want something, for example, perfumes, etc., it may be worthwhile, depending how well you know your prices, to purchase it whilst on board the ship, because often you're obviously not paying taxes, etc., and it can be cheaper. And if it isn't cheaper, it might not be a massive difference. And so you've got it there, bird in the hand versus two in the bush sort of situation. Now, shopping aside, the other things that I would say is that you should consider maybe using it for something that really is going to be unique to that experience or enhance your experience, and not just for the sake of it. Maybe you'll find yourself at Gunbay and say, oh, you know what? I've never had Wagyu, or I feel like Wagyu tonight. I'd rather have it on that. Again, this is where your preferences are going to play the biggest deciding role. But my general recommendation is that once you get past anything you may have wanted to purchase at the stores, the rest of your Sailor loot is something that you should rather use as like a shield towards any expenses you're going to incur. Maybe you don't have a bar tab. Great, you have Sailor loot which can act like a bar tab. And that's a wrap for this video on everything you're going to need to know to do with Sailor loot. I hope you found it useful and at the very least entertaining. I'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye.